In the 90s, the markets had evolved. The NES had proven that home consoles could be successful in the North American market again, and their structure of having quality control over the games made for their system became a market standard. Now the purchasing power of that powerful market was open again to hungry companies looking to expand. And let me tell you, Sega was starving. Sega sat in Nintendo's shadow during the third generation. They saw their opportunity when the 16-bit era hit and released the Sega Genesis. It boasted more arcade quality performance than Nintendo, but it lacked a tentpole franchise, something to go up against Mario, a mascot to build its brand on.
If someone tries to touch you in a place or in a way that makes you feel uncomfortable, that's no good.
Sonic the Hedgehog was released in 1991, and it was a hit. Its fast-paced, colorful, musical style flexed the muscle of the Genesis, and it showed what Nintendo can't. Sega had found its mascot, but it had another problem. Though Sega had its own arcade systems, Nintendo owned most arcade console port licenses. So Sega had to get creative, and get creative they did. Their strategy was to license celebrities for games that would be instantly recognizable, and the NBA just so happened to be full of them. The NBA was booming, and it was all thanks to this guy. Well, these guys, but for now we're focused on this guy. Every player forevermore should thank Michael Jordan. His team created the player institution model in the form that we know it today. Michael Jordan was an industry unto himself in a way no athlete before him was. His ability on the court and his acumen off it made him the thing all purists loathe. He had become bigger than the game itself. But a funny thing happened. The sport didn't die, instead it grew, and players gained even more market influence. The home console market was still pretty fresh off its resurgence in the US, and the NBA and the Players Union weren't quite sure what to do with it. As a result, video games were pretty much treated as individual licenses. It's almost impossible to fathom now, but games were seen as similar to a soda sponsorship. Players could slap their own names and likeness onto whatever game came calling, and Sega jumped on this. Notably, Sega would rope Pat Riley and David Robinson into their fold as part of their tactic to use celebrities to sell their games. Both Pat Riley Basketball and David Robinson's Supreme Court featured the likeness of their stars and the generic fill-ins for the rest of the players and teams because they were individual licenses. And it worked. Sega was humming, and absolutely nothing would get in its way. Until something did. Sega did well outside of Japan. The Super Nintendo did well, everywhere. The competition cut Nintendo's grasp, but Nintendo was still clearly king. And they too wanted to capitalize on celebrity. If you were a fan of basketball video games, this was quite an era. Bill Laimbeer is one of the last players you would imagine to get a game. He was a good player on the great Bad Boys Pistons team, but he was an enforcer that pretty much no one outside of Detroit liked. But Bill Laimbeer's combat basketball was a good fit for him. The game was set in a future in which Laimbeer was commissioner and outlawed referees. The idea was that you could fight and use weapons. It was a slick endorsement from a former bad boy. A game that would otherwise have been forgotten had some legs because of the name attached to it. This was the lay of the land. Players could tag their name alongside a game, and both sides would hope that it would help the game sell. So what about the GOAT himself? What about the man who had transcended sport? What about the most famous athlete in the world? Well, Jordan got his own games too. Michael Jordan in Flight was a more natural deal. It was a 3D style basketball game for the MS-DOS. While limited in presentation, the perspective was something to behold, but the novelty wears quickly. EA made this game, and you can see the seeds of future mechanics in this game, but In Flight is just a little too limited to be good. Jordan also starred in Chaos in the Windy City. This game would truly test the clout of Jordan. It was a side-scrolling action game, and it was not pretty. Jordan may have been famous, but not famous enough to make this game a success. Jordan would stop endorsing games altogether. Furthermore, he even pulled his license from future NBA licensed games. And then he pulled himself from the NBA.
I'm going to miss the game. I'm going to miss the opportunities of winning extra championships and spending more time with teammates for 8 months and going on trips or whatever.
On October 6th, 1993, Michael Jordan shocked the world. He retired from the NBA to pursue a minor league baseball career. The NBA now faced an uncertain future in which the greatest player who ever lived and the most bankable athlete in the world was walking away. The game's biggest star was going to leave a huge vacuum. How was the NBA going to adjust? Basketball video games were also adjusting. The individual license model was fine, but no one had taken advantage of the NBA the way Madden had for the NFL. Fans of the league were still looking for that killer app, that game that would shut it down, be the definitive game of the NBA, a game that would set a new standard. They didn't have to wait long.
Kaboom! Wild shot! He's heating up. Here it comes. Boom shakalaka! Boom shakalaka! Boom shakalaka!
Boom shakalaka. Indeed.